Hello, I'm Anthony Malakian, news editor of Waters, and today I'm here with Mark Pengelly, U.S. editor of Risk Magazine, and we're here to talk about the Volcker Rule, which is the ban on prop trading. Mark, there seems to be some confusion around the metrics that banks can use and the various definitions. You wrote an article about this in the August issue of Risk. Why don't you tell us about what some of your findings were?
Yeah, sure. So the Volcker Rule bans proprietary trading, private investments in private equity firms and hedge funds. It's obviously named after inflation battling former Fed chairman Paul Volcker. In some areas, implementation of the Volcker Rule, which regulators are currently working through, is fairly black and white because private equity hedge fund businesses simply need to be spun off. Standalone prop trading desks, you've already seen these banks taking steps to close them or spin them off. Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley, for instance, have made public that they've been doing exactly that. Okay. But there are some bank activities which fall into more of a grey area. And the regulators released a report back in January which talked about some of this. The Financial Stability Oversight Council, which is the new body that brings together the Treasury and the SEC and the CFTC and all these other bodies. And what they said was that because there's no clear definition of market making or underwriting, for instance, in the legislation, and those are permitted activities under Dodd-Frank, it becomes very difficult then to distinguish between what is prop trading and what is not, because those activities by their nature involve taking some principal risk, and some bank activities involve taking more principal risk than others, because derivatives desks, for example, would typically take more principal risk than a simple agency market making equities operation, for instance, which wouldn't really take, it's not really supposed to take any principal risk. So in that situation, what are you going to do to distinguish what is prop and what is not? And the answer, given that the regulators accept the need for some principal risk taking to continue at banks, an equity derivatives desk, for instance, might take positions in order to facilitate client activity over the course of the trading day. The regulators sympathise with that a little bit. Maybe you could make a case that the spirit of the Volcker Rule goes against that. The regulators accept the need for it. So what they're going to need is some kind of metrics which they can analyse, risk metrics. A report by the FSOC in January named 4 different types of metrics: revenue to risk metrics, inventory turnover and customer flow metrics. Okay. Things like VAR, things like simple inventory turnover measures, Sharpe ratios even. That's a metric that I'm sure some of your viewers will be very familiar with. They're analysing all of these metrics to see what might be the best solution, or combination of solutions for working out where prop trading is taking place and where they essentially draw the line and say that's not a permitted activity. Okay,
very interesting. And for our viewers, WatersTechnology.com, why don't you kind of give us, from just your opinion on what are potentially some of the technology issues at stake here?
Well, potentially there's quite a role for technology firms and software vendors in all of this, because as well as the regulators, first of all, the regulators are consulting with the industry, trying to work out what it might be the most appropriate way of implementing this rule. And in fact, they're required to come out with rules by October to implement this. So they're well on the way to coming out with something. We don't know exactly what they'll come out with. They won't tell us, but it seems that the solution, they're going to come up with a fairly pragmatic approach that it's going to involve rigorously going through the risk metrics that banks are running. The regulators need to look at and analyse these metrics. I mean, I'm sure there's job opportunities out there at the supervisory agencies if anybody's interested in that. But from the vendor's perspective, I mean, within the banks, they need to come up with some solution that is going to ensure that they're not breaching any of the various boundaries that regulators decide to set. And in many cases, I'm sure obviously most banks will know what their Sharpe ratios are and what their desk level VAR is, for instance. But possibly there is a role for tech vendors, because they'll need something that brings all of that together and looks at it in a holistically, and can give the regulators ultimately the kind of reporting they're looking for. And we don't know what that is yet. So it's a moving target, but I'm sure there are opportunities there if that's what you're looking for.
All right, good stuff, Mark. You can read more of Mark and other features that they have on the Dodd-Frank Act and specifically the Volcker Rule. We will link at the bottom to the article that he wrote. Until next week, thank you and have a good week.